Just Netscape, the browser that created the internet, boom and bust. In 1994, the World Wide Web was a curiosity for academics and computer enthusiasts. Most people had never heard of a browser or understood what surfing the web meant. Then came Netscape Navigator, the software that transformed the internet from an obscure research network into the most disruptive force in modern business history. Netscape didn't just make the web accessible to millions of ordinary users. It ignited the dot-com boom with the most spectacular initial public offering Wall Street had ever seen. But in one of technology's greatest ironies, the very success that made Netscape a household name also painted the largest possible target on its back. Microsoft, the software giant that had missed the internet revolution entirely, would unleash a campaign so ruthless and comprehensive that it would not only destroy Netscape, but fundamentally reshape how we think about competition in the digital age. The story begins not with Netscape, but with Mosaic, the world's first graphical web browser. Created at the University of Illinois by a 22-year-old programmer named Marc Andreessen, Mosaic did something revolutionary. It displayed text and images on the same page, making the web visual and intuitive for the first time. Before Mosaic, accessing information on the internet required memorizing cryptic commands and navigating through walls of green text. Mosaic changed everything by letting users simply point and click their way through an interconnected web of documents, images, and links. The browser was distributed for free, and by 1993, internet traffic increased by an astounding 341,000% as millions discovered this new digital frontier. But Andreessen was just getting started. After graduating, he moved to Silicon Valley where he met Jim Clark, the billionaire founder of Silicon Graphics, who had been searching for the next big thing in computing. Clark immediately recognized the commercial potential that Mosaic represented. But there was a problem. The University of Illinois owned all the rights to the browser. So in April 1994, Clark and Andreessen founded Mosaic Communications Corporation with the audacious goal of rebuilding the browser from scratch and commercializing the web. They recruited the best programmers from the original Mosaic team, promising equity stakes and the chance to create something that would change the world. Working 18-hour days fueled by pizza and ambition, the team built their new browser in just 4 months. They called it Mosaic Netscape, later shortened to simply Netscape Navigator. The browser was faster, more stable, and more feature-rich than its predecessor. But most importantly, it was designed from the ground up for commercial use. Clark understood that giving away the browser for free would maximize adoption, while making money through server software sales to businesses wanting to establish their own web presence. The strategy worked beyond their wildest dreams. When Netscape Navigator launched in October 1994, it spread across the internet like wildfire. Universities, businesses, and home users rushed to download the software, which was distributed freely through the web itself. A revolutionary distribution method that bypassed traditional software retailers entirely. Within 6 months, Netscape commanded an astounding 75% of the browser market. The company, now renamed Netscape Communications, was processing thousands of downloads per day and racking up millions in server software sales. Navigator's dominance seemed unshakable, particularly since Microsoft's competing Internet Explorer was widely regarded as inferior, slow, and prone to crashes. Bill Gates himself had initially dismissed the internet as a passing fad, leaving Microsoft scrambling to catch up to a trend they had completely missed. But Netscape's real masterstroke wasn't technological, it was financial. On August 9, 1995, Netscape went public in an initial public offering that would redefine how America thought about technology investing. The company had originally planned to price shares at $14 each, but overwhelming demand forced them to raise the price to $28 just hours before trading began. When markets opened, Netscape stock exploded to $71 per share before closing at $58, valuing the 16-month-old company at over $2.9 billion. Marc Andreessen, who had been a broke college student just 2 years earlier, was suddenly worth $58 million at age 24. The IPO created instant millionaires throughout Silicon Valley and demonstrated that internet companies could generate wealth on a scale previously unimaginable. Suddenly, every investor, entrepreneur, and college dropout wanted in on the internet gold rush. Venture capital poured into any startup with a .com domain name, and the Nasdaq soared as investors bet that traditional business models were obsolete in the digital age. But Netscape's IPO success also accomplished something far more dangerous. It woke up Microsoft. Bill Gates, who had been focused on defending Microsoft's Windows operating system monopoly, suddenly realized that web browsers represented an existential threat to his empire. If users could access all their applications and data through a browser, they might not need Windows at all. In December 1995, Gates issued his famous Internet Tidal Wave memo, declaring that the Internet was the most important single development since the IBM PC. He redirected Microsoft's entire corporate strategy around a single objective, destroying Netscape and controlling the browser market at any cost. What followed was one of the most ruthless competitive campaigns in business history, a war that would ultimately lead to federal antitrust charges and fundamentally change how we regulate technology monopolies. Microsoft's strategy was brilliantly simple and devastatingly effective. Instead of trying to build a better browser, they would leverage their Windows monopoly to make Internet Explorer impossible to avoid. Starting with Windows 95, Microsoft began bundling Internet Explorer directly into the operating system, making it the default browser on every new PC sold. Computer manufacturers who wanted to install Netscape instead were threatened with losing their Windows licenses entirely, effectively cutting them off from the PC market. Microsoft also began giving Internet Explorer away for free to consumers, while paying internet service providers millions of dollars to make it their default browser. They struck exclusive deals with online services like AOL, ensuring that millions of new internet users would never even see Netscape software. Most controversially, Microsoft integrated Internet Explorer so deeply into Windows that removing it would supposedly break the entire operating system, a claim that would later be challenged in federal court. The results were predictable and swift. Netscape's browser market share, which had peaked at over 90% in 1996, began hemorrhaging to Internet Explorer. By 1998, Microsoft had captured more than 50% of the browser market despite Internet Explorer still being technically inferior to Navigator. Netscape's server software sales also collapsed as Microsoft bundled competing products into Windows at no additional cost. The company that had created the commercial internet was being systematically strangled by a competitor that used its monopoly position in operating systems to dominate an entirely different market. Desperate to survive, Netscape made increasingly erratic strategic moves, including a disastrous decision to completely rewrite Navigator's code from scratch, a process that took over 2 years and allowed Microsoft to solidify its dominance. By 1998, Netscape was hemorrhaging money and market share, leading to one of the most significant corporate acquisitions of the internet era. America Online, the dial-up internet giant, purchased Netscape for $4.2 billion in November 1998, not for its browser technology, but for its popular web portal and advertising revenue. Under AOL's ownership, Netscape continued to decline as a browser, dropping to less than 1% market share by the mid-2000s. The brand limped along as a web portal and eventually as a low-budget internet service provider, bearing little resemblance to the innovative company that had once defined the web experience. AOL officially discontinued the Netscape browser in 2008, ending one of the most influential software products in computing history, but Netscape's legacy extended far beyond its own corporate fate. The browser wars and Netscape's destruction had profound implications that resonate today. In 1998, the U.S. Department of Justice filed antitrust charges against Microsoft, arguing that the company had used its Windows monopoly to illegally dominate the browser market. The trial featured embarrassing videotaped depositions of Bill Gates and internal Microsoft emails discussing strategies to cut off Netscape's air supply. Although Microsoft avoided being broken up, the company was forced to modify some of its most anti-competitive practices and faced increased regulatory scrutiny that arguably prevented it from dominating subsequent technology trends like search engines and social media. More importantly, Netscape's open-source browser code lived on through the Mozilla Foundation, eventually evolving into Firefox, which would later challenge Internet Explorer's dominance and prove that innovation could still triumph over monopoly power. The Netscape story represents both the promise and peril of the digital economy. This was a company that created an entirely new industry, made the internet accessible to millions of people, and demonstrated that software could generate unprecedented wealth and influence. Netscape's innovations in web browsing, e-commerce, and digital distribution laid the foundation for everything from Amazon to Google to Facebook. Their IPO didn't just create individual fortunes, it established the venture capital ecosystem that continues to fund technological innovation today. Yet Netscape also demonstrated how quickly dominant companies can fall when faced with competitors willing to use monopoly power to distort markets. The browser wars showed that in technology, being first and being best isn't always enough to survive against opponents with deeper pockets and fewer scruples. Netscape created the internet boom, but its destruction also foreshadowed the bust that would follow when investors realized that revolutionary technology alone doesn't guarantee business success. The company that taught the world to navigate the web ultimately couldn't navigate the treacherous waters of monopoly capitalism, leaving behind a legacy as complex and contradictory as the digital age itself.